welcome back to Game Galaxy, and today marks the 25th anniversary of the original Super Famicom release of Final Fantasy V. 1992 was an incredible year for games, and many great games recently have been hitting 25 years old, and it just blows my mind the whole passage of time, how short it is and how long it is all at once. Now, it took North America all the way to 1999 to get a copy, officially, of Final Fantasy V as a part of Final Fantasy's Anthology on PlayStation 1. So, as you know, everything was screwed up with the Final Fantasy numbering for many, many years. So, we got the original Final Fantasy on Nintendo, the Famicom 2 and 3 was skipped, Final Fantasy 4 came over here as Final Fantasy 2, and Final Fantasy 6 came over as Final Fantasy 3. So, the Japanese 2 and 3 and 5 were skipped. But we erased, we got all that sorted out in the end, and now we have it. But, beyond the PlayStation 1 release, in 2006 there was a fantastic Game Boy Advance release of it. You can see a little bit of art there. These are great versions. Now, like a lot of people, Final Fantasy VII is what brought me and drew me into Final Fantasy, because I had a friend, I had heard about it, I played the Nintendo one way back then, but it was Final Fantasy VII that brought me in, because my friend was like, bro, you gotta play it. So I did, So while I would like to say that 7 is my favorite, if you honestly ask me my question of what's my favorite Final Fantasy, realistically the answer would either be Final Fantasy 3, the Japanese 3, so on Famicom, or Final Fantasy V. And why is that? And I just think Final Fantasy V for me was the right game at the right time at that certain point in my life. It just took the job system from Final Fantasy 3, the real 3, and expanded on it so much more, even if I personally didn't utilize it properly enough. But the game begins with a king leaving his castle to go check on the wind crystal as winds are dying down and something is off. When he arrives at the wind shrine, the crystal shatters right in front of his very eyes. To make matters worse, a giant meteor crashes into the planet from space, which causes you and your chocobo buddy to go check it out. And you have your own chocobo named Boko. I cannot tell you how much Boko means to me. I love Boko. Once there, you may meet up with Princess Reina or Lena, it depends on what translation you're looking at, but she defiantly followed after her father after hearing the meteor crash, and Galuf, an old man that seemingly was on his way to the shrine, but hit his head and it caused him a bit of temporary amnesia when the meteor crashed and all that. Shortly, you join up with the mysterious pirate Ferris and the quest begins. Basically, the crystals are in danger, and they also seal away an evil sorcerer named, appropriately, as Exdeath. Of course, Exdeath must be stopped, and that will cause the characters to embark on this multiple world and dimensional adventure. Now, as time has passed and I think back on Final Fantasy V, the game's story is nothing spectacular, almost to the point of non-existence feelings at times, but where it does shine is the gameplay and the mood of nailing that hook of the RPG genre. I think a big thing for me personally is Final Fantasy V's music. A lot of compositions from Uematsu for Final Fantasy V are some of my favorite among the series. The use of colors and graphical style is just right for me as well. It's more detailed than Final Fantasy IV, but also still more gamey fun than Final Fantasy VI's more mature look. And who can forget that epic battle sequence on the bridge and that awesome yet hilarious battle with Gilgamesh? For those of you that don't know the hilarity and awesomeness of Gilgamesh, I won't spoil it for you. You'll enjoy it when you do. Final Fantasy V has tons of humor mixed in the seriousness of the game, including getting a lap dance. That's just one of many crazy, funny things that happen in this game. I played this game in the summer of 2006 on my original PlayStation, and like I previously said, it was a great time for me, and I still had so much imagination and joy in my eyes, and I think the open nature of the stories of a lot of older Final Fantasy games allowed you as the player to imprint your own imagination on the world. And while that sounds like an artsy way for me to excuse away poor writing, I'm not going to mark it up as that. While I had such a great experience recently with Final Fantasy 15, I have to say Final Fantasy V is one of my favorite, and the music is just incredible. I'm going to replay this in the future because, like I mentioned previously, I severely underutilized the job system and played the majority of the game as having my characters as the bear class or no class. Bear class can equip any weapon or armor, and I believe they take longer to level up, but in the end are more powerful that way. I don't know if that's true, I could be wrong, and maybe that was my reasoning for having them bear at the end of the game, I can't remember. Anyway, I missed out on the core aspect of the game, which is being able to change your character class whenever you want. So I'm definitely going to replay this game in the future. And when I do, it'll be on the Game Boy Advance. A funny story is my first car was a 1998 Ford Taurus. And that model of car was a flexible fuel kind of car, meaning it could take multiple forms of fuel and still run. And so to have this distinction on the car, on the side of it, it said FFV, which stood for, that it was a flexible fuel kind of vehicle. So because it was FFV, I always called it my Final Fantasy V car. And I don't know if you can see it in this picture here, but yes, that was my Final Fantasy V car. I was so sad the day I sold that car and I watched the guy drive away with it. It's funny how many memories can be implanted on an item or something we spent time with, and I was just like, there goes the Final Fantasy V car. My advice to anybody that hasn't played Final Fantasy V before and would like to is to either get yourself the PlayStation 1 version or the Game Boy Advance version. There are mobile phone and Steam remakes or remasters of this game, but I can't recommend them. I haven't bought them, so I am doing this based on screenshots, but I feel they've changed the sprites and the art so much that it changes the mood and feeling of the game, of the original art. And if you go on Steam, there's plenty of negative reviews that say it's clunky, and there's even tiling issues where, these games are drawn with tiles, right? But they're misaligned tiles a lot. So I don't know if that's fixed, but I just cannot recommend that based on what I'm seeing. It does not look like Final Fantasy V. It looks like a cheap fan remake, So the two differences on the versions here are, if you want like the most pure, closest to the original, like a port of the Super Famicom version in English, then Final Fantasy Anthology on PS1 is going to be the way you want to go. Just know that there are a little bit of slow loading times and whatnot. Now, the Game Boy Advance version is honestly the one I'm going to give, unless you're like a super purist like me who did want to play the PlayStation one, grab yourself the Game Boy Advance one, or if you can get it off a digital store or whatever. This one had a brand new English translation, and honestly, from what I've played, I didn't go through the full game again on this, but I have played a bunch. The translation on this one is way better than the PlayStation one. It's just better. Oh, one thing I want to say is that Final Fantasy V, at least from the PlayStation one, I don't know if the difficulty was changed for the Game Boy one, but incredibly challenging game, and the encounter rate is brutal. You will be fighting a lot. I mean, a lot. So if random encounters drive you nuts and you're not used to fighting that much, then this may turn you off a bit. But I'm not sure about the Game Boy Advance version because I didn't spend enough time with it yet. But I do know Final Fantasy 1 and 2 on Game Boy Advance were considerably dumbed down and made easier. But again, I'm gonna vote for this because while I did play a good portion of this, it's just the loading times, everything's gonna be much better, so I'm gonna just plug Game Boy Advance version one more time. Hopefully they can just release it again in its normal form. Don't mess with it. But I want to thank you so much for spending this time with me to remember the 25 years of Final Fantasy V. I hope you guys have played Final Fantasy V, and if you haven't, I do recommend it because it's a whole lot of fun, and there's a lot of hilarity that ensues in well. So let me know in the comments if you've played Final Fantasy V, what you thought about it, or what your favorite Final Fantasy be. It could be old school or new school. I want to know what people like about Final Fantasy. I mean, I know what they like, but I want to know what Final Fantasies other people love. Because I have big love for 3 and 5. So thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any videos in the future, and I'll see you next time.